You're listening to
My Quebec City 50 Plus Edition.
Hello everyone, this is Benoît. Welcome to the My Quebec City 50 Plus Edition. Today I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Dan Griffin. What three words would you use to describe yourself?
I would probably say storyteller by nature.
Storyteller, okay. What types of stories in particular?
Well, I'm 91 years old, and I started writing probably at about 80. I told my life story in episodes, just stories at different time without chronology, just what came to my mind. And I wrote 60 or 70 stories. I put them in a book in 2017. And from then I've done public speaking. I'm known, I guess, among my friends as someone who just tells stories,
Are there any particular stories or anecdotes that kind of stick out to you when you're writing this book?
Well, I wrote a note this morning about Montgomery Clift. In 1953, the Hitchcock movie, I Confess, was done in Quebec City. And Montgomery Clift played the role of a priest in this movie. And he was kind of trained in the habits of a priest by a friend of mine, Father Murphy. And one evening, Father Murphy asked me if I would walk Montgomery Clift back to the Chateau Frontenac. And I was 16 or 17 years old, and I was so proud of that, And I said to myself, probably if I walk down Grande Allée, I will meet some of my friends and they will say, we met Dan Griffin with Montgomery Clift, But ironically, we never met anybody that I knew, and that was always something that stayed in my mind. How come nobody can vouch for me and say that we saw him with Montgomery Clift?
So for this book, you gathered many different stories, and then you decided which ones you would include, which ones you would do more research on. Did this project involve doing a lot of research? I mean, is it archival mostly, or mostly speaking with family and friends?
It's mostly memory. I would say about 90% memory. And I didn't have to really consult very much about it because they were happenings and things that I remembered well. And I thought they were worth telling,
Yeah. You'd mentioned a bit earlier about how you identified as a storyteller. For you personally, why have you made that an important part of your life, to be a storyteller? You mentioned being a speaker as well. What about stories are important to you?
I would say that everybody has stories, but not everybody tells them. Growing up, my dad never told us very much about himself, and we were always wanting more of his life experience. And when I had children, we talked about that. And I promised myself that I would tell a lot about my life and events and happenings. And I wanted to leave something to my children about my life. And I think maybe that was the motivating point, to put it in writing, to leave something.
Is your ancestry or cultural identity, is that an important part of your life now? Something you want to share with your children as well?
Yes, well, it's important in the sense that I'm probably 8th generation in Canada from France on my mother's side, and I'm 6th generation Irish on my father's side. I consider myself to have two cultures, and you will find this one funny, but I will say Irish and Québécois from my mother and, of course, my father. And I'm very conscious of both cultures. I don't feel in my heart Canadian that much. I feel more Québécois Irish. My friends used to always call me le plus Québécois des Irlandais.
Okay. Have you done more research of your background? Where and when your ancestors came from, France or Ireland?
See, I went back to school when I was 60 years old and did a bachelor in Irish history, spending 2 or 3 summers in Ireland and 1 summer in France, and just visiting people and talking with people. I've traveled a lot, and when I travel, what I like to do is talk to people.
Yeah, and Irish culture is a very important place in Quebec's own history. What do you wish more people knew in Quebec about the Irish history and culture that's present here?
It leads me to want to talk about Quebec City. Quebec City is the place where the most marriages took place between Irish and Québécois. It was probably because of religion, both being Catholic. And there's nowhere in the world that you have that phenomenon. And it's something that attracted me back here. I can really live my Irishness and Quebecois culture in Quebec City. And I couldn't even do that in Montreal, actually.
Quebec City feels more
Irish, absolutely.
Yeah?
Yes, absolutely.
Tell me more about the Irish community in Quebec City. I've got to admit that it's not something I know much about. I know there's a strong presence in, I believe it's the Shannon area, Valcartier-Shannon.
Yeah.
How would you describe a bit about the background of the Irish history and community here?
Most of the Irish arrived here in the 1820s, and a lot of them settled in the Vallée de la Jacques-Cartier. Shannon is a part of that.
Tell us a bit more about that.
As a child, I used to spend summers in Shannon on my uncle's farm. Of course, it was all Irish there. Shannon was populated in the 1820s by about 40 couples of Irish people. They intermarried for many years among themselves. You know, they didn't marry outside. My dad was the first one to marry a Francophone girl from Lac-Saint-Jean. And when they were married, he didn't speak French and she didn't speak English. But they made it just the same. That's probably why we are what we are now, you know. And I feel fortunate to have two cultures and two languages.
This idea of kind of simultaneously feeling like you have two cultures, both Irish Quebec, Francophone Quebec. Was that ever difficult for you growing up, feeling that you had two cultures? Did you ever feel like you're almost caught between two, or was it always a source of pride for you, a source of belonging? Was there any difficulties with that?
I had difficulties in the sense that in my family I was the one who promoted French, my mother's culture, maybe more than my brothers and sisters. And we used to have a few battles about that, you know. But I live in both cultures. I really have, you know, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, I definitely relate to this idea that one's identity, one's culture is very personal, even within a family. Of course, it can vary. Each person's different.
Absolutely. So. I give you an example. I have 4 sons, and I consider that 2 are of French culture and 2 are not as much Irish as me, but Anglophone culture. It depends who your friends are, going to school, and who you hang out with, and all that.
What advice would you give to young people?
Oh, yes. One particular thing, ask your parents as many questions as you can, because when you're old, if you don't know those things, you will be frustrated.
Great advice. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
It was very, very interesting speaking about your ancestry, how you express your cultural identity, what that means to you, and about the Irish culture, community, and history here in Quebec City.
And I thank you people for giving me the occasion to express without interruption. It was really wonderful.
Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more. This is My Quebec City 50 Plus Edition podcast.